Time for yoga with Jenny. We're going to keep going with feet, and today we're going to really take those feet and look at how our hips start to affect our feet and vice versa. This kind of top-down issues can happen, but of course we saw the other day that the way our feet move or don't move, or the way our toes move or don't move, or separate or crunch and bend and stay in that position can also affect everything up the chain. So basically we're starting to look at hip rotation and knee alignment. So if we think about, the base of our yoga standing practice is our Tadasana, our mountain pose. If you stand on your feet just for a second here, and before we get started with movement, and just look at the way your feet generally fall to the ground. What my teacher has us do is, you close your eyes, you walk in place, and you stop and don't change your feet. Don't fix anything, and just look and see what you see. Do your feet tend to turn out? Do you tend to stand in that kind of duck foot position, or do they go the other way? And then up through the feet, do your feet arches fall in? Do they lean? Do you lean to the outer edge of your feet? Do you feel like your toes are all kind of clumped together in one position or another? And then looking up the chain, look at your knees. Are they falling into that position where the arches are falling? So are they following that line? And just extrapolating from there, what it has to do with are the muscles around the hip, how they are controlling that femur, the thigh bone, and the knee, and how it hits gravitational forces as they come up from our feet. So I'm just going to literally turn my feet to face forward. So one of the major factors, as I mentioned, is that arch, that fallen arch, that knees falling and adducting, meaning that the outer hip is weakened, right? So this posterior and outer hip are weak. So go ahead and just do that, feel that position. And then do the opposite, kind of try to lift the arches like we talked about, that doming of the foot on Tuesday. Keeping the toes relatively relaxed, so I don't want to crunch them under, just lift the arches. And notice how that's kind of, that lift of the arch moves the kneecaps. I know I'm wearing black, so it's a little hard to see, but it moves the kneecaps from kind of pointing inward to pointing forward. You could exaggerate and lean to the outer edge of the feet, right? But we just want to think a little lift of those arches and that strength that you feel up through the knee and the hip. So this will come into play in a couple of minutes. If you have access to a TheraBand, the best thing that you can do to activate these muscles in the hip is to either have a loop and put it around your legs, or have a band and you tie it, put a knot in it. Now you don't want legs right together. You want to have that sit bone distance stance. So even with the legs in that, I have a little bit of space, in other words, between my legs. We're going to start with some bridging. I'm going to bring my block with me to start. So do the same thing where you kind of futz with your feet, try to turn them to parallel, try to focus on, as best you can, because we can't really see from lying our backs. I gotta get my ponytail out of the way too. And don't go crazy with this cue. I often hear heels to the butt. I do not, personally, I don't do that because I find that it creates a lot of shear in that knee joint. I also don't want your feet way far forward, which means those hamstrings are really going to have to activate too much to pull you up and forward. So kind of a medium distance away from your glutes. Find your breath. Find your breath. Where is it? How are you breathing today? Do you feel it all up in your chest? In the ribs? In your belly? And over the next couple of breaths, just feel a sense of that full body movement. So all over. It's not just belly breathing. It's not just rib cage movement, widening. It's not just chest and shoulders. A nice long exhale, so you're completely closing inward, pushing every last drop out of your lungs, and your core comes up to do that work of engaging and stabilizing and pushing the breath out. Good. And then go ahead and grab your block. Lift your pelvis up, so it does require a little bit of strength just to lift up and put your hips on the block. I like to start here at the lowest block setting. Personally, I think you don't need much more height. It's a little less impact on the lower back when you're at that low height. Try to relax into the block. So as best we can, making it feel almost like the neutral position on the floor. Tailbone relaxed, buttocks relaxed. And then we're going to practice engaging with the band. So often when we have resistance and we have it on the outside, we tend to think of pushing and turning the knees. And all I really want you to do is what we did in standing just a moment ago. So if my knees fall together, my arches fall in, I kind of curl inward. The opposite is what we want to get. We want to get those arches to lift, the feet are level, and just a little push into the band so your knees come straight. Inhale to relax, and you can let the knees drift in. Notice how it's connected to your feet. Exhale, try to lift and engage the arches. Moving the knees out a little and pushing into the band. 2 more times like that. So in other words, I'm not going out here. I'm not fanning. I'm not going into clamshell. I'm just coming to parallel. And I'm trying to feel that movement, how it's about my feet, my ankles, my knees, and my hips. It's all connected. These are muscles that are often not strong for many of us. They're tight, but often not strong. So then we attempt bridging, and then we're pushing. We're trying to go higher. We hear, oh, take your bridge, lift it higher. And then we get there, but our solution is to use our back. And we really overdo it in those spinal muscles. So what needs to be happening to lift off your block, you need to engage with the band and then lift up. Deep breaths. And then slowly set it back down and let those knees fall inward. Good. Now if you're one of those people who wants more, you take the block away. You try to go from the floor, go from the bottom, lifting up those arches just a little. Not to the point that you feel your balls of your feet come off the floor, so keep those pressed, but it's just muscular lift. Push into the band and lift up. Notice if you get a play from side to side as you're coming up. That might be your dominant side, kind of dominating the movement. Try to keep hips level and breathe. If you want to go higher, try to push into your feet and the band. Engage your hips. Then engage your back a little more to lift up. And then slowly lower it down, letting those knees fall inward. And we're just going to rock the knees side to side. So in that way, hip opening, in terms of a sequence, if you're wanting to work on bridging, my recommendation is more hip opening. So more lengthening through the quad and the hip flexors, and more strengthening in the back of the hip to get the hips to come up higher. So it's not all just in your back. We're gonna roll up to one side, and you can use a block as a pillow. I like something with a little more padding, so I'm gonna use my yoga blanket. You lie on your side. We're gonna try a couple of movements that are building up to our chair pose. So these are movements of squatting, being able to bend our knees, but also move in our hips without the, again, as much impact on our back. So it's really hips and lower back are stable, and then the motion happens at that femur moving inside the socket and the knee and the ankle bending. So yes, the feet come in to the picture once we're standing. I'm gonna first try to gather in with my strength. It's almost like, it's not like crunching, like I don't wanna think of curling, but I do wanna think of engaging all of that wraparound strength. And the first thing we're gonna do is just that separation that we did on our back. So here's a good place to see it. As I push into the band and I lift my leg up, it's just, it may be a little wider than hips distance, but I'm just feeling the engagement with the band. And then slowly lowering down. If you find that your hip is very stiff, lowering down is hard, that's good information to have. So that means, again, very tight outer hips and front of the hip, so that maybe your pelvis is stuck in a tilt. I've got a flexed foot here. You could point your foot, but the reason for having that flexed foot is to, again, feel that ankle is bent in connection with a bent knee, which is squatting. Just that kind of walking through, coming into that stride. Sometimes you can just hold it and just feel. What is it like to maintain a little bit of push? Maybe I'm thinking about my arch of my foot right here. So maybe you try pointing the foot, although that can lead to cramping. Good. Okay, now lengthen your legs and do the same thing. It's just a little separation without my hip kind of lifting up, without my toes and my knee fanning up. And with an awareness of my core. So I like to coordinate with my exhale, but you know, after a couple reps, if that goes by the wayside and you're just trying to breathe and feel your foot, your knee, your hip are in alignment, that's okay too. Good, and then get rid of this thing. I like to lie with my bottom knee bent. It just feels a little bit easier on that IT band, that outer hip tightness that you might have. This top leg comes up, it's again as if I've just done that separation, that engagement through my hip. And then I'm gonna try to come into my squat, my chair pose. So if your knee lowers down as you bend your knee, again, chances are good that arch has fallen, that knee turns in means that outer hip is not strong. It's not doing its job to keep that knee in alignment. You might feel knee issues happen as you do that. So as I bend, I'm just imagining that pressure of the band, but you can't really keep it there. Otherwise, I would keep it there. As I bend, I think of pushing my knee a little bit upward. And this angle is a little bit funny. The camera is a little bit too high to really capture what my knee is doing, but I don't want it to go down. I don't want it to turn up. It's not turn out. It's just parallel to the ground. Really target it. Also watch the foot placement, right? Want to be moving with your knee. And then just rest, let that knee adduct, fall even to the floor, and take a spinal twist. And back around. Now we'll move on to our second side. So it's always good to remember to give your other side some love too. Even if you have one side, one knee, one hip that has pain or tightness or issues, right? That we really want to build that strength in a symmetrical way. Even if our body isn't completely symmetrical. So lifting, engaging. You could, however, do a few more on the side that you're really struggling on in terms of bringing that strength up to speed. I'm going to lift, separate. If I really turn my foot, notice how again, it's that temptation to kind of like drop my knee and lag behind. It's foot moving at the same pace as the knee. Just like that bridging position. Just separate, just feel. Engage up through your core of your body. What that means is your belly doesn't drop to the floor. Your rib cage pulls in and knits. And there's a little, little feeling of zipping up the front of your body. But don't go crazy and bend over your legs. Sometimes you don't even need to move. You just separate your legs and hold it, especially with tension from a band. That isometric hold. It causes a little bit of shaking. It feels like that muscle was really like, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. And then as you work with straight legs, it's the same thing. Possibly even more important to lift and engage through the core. It's harder to balance when we're on one hip. And I've mentioned this before, it's harder to move in the side plane. We're so not used to moving to the side. Our lives are all forward, right? All sagittal plane. So moving to the side just is, a lot of us, again, lack strength, but we also lack awareness and range of motion. As I'm pushing, I'm trying not to turn my toes up. I'm trying not to turn my toes in. I'm trying to keep them straight forward. Again, you could just press. So I'm starting to feel it right where I'm touching right here, kind of at the top of the glute. Also, I feel it in the back. And slowly lower it down. I'm going to take this guy away. And we're going to try our sideline squatting. So if I put my bottom knee into that position, I'm already there with my bottom leg. Lift the top leg up so that slight separation. Lift and engage through the core. And then trying to bend the knee, steering it over the second toe. And then straighten back to where I started. Yeah, it's tricky. I keep looking up at the angle on the camera and it looks like my knee is falling down, but I believe it's because the camera is looking from up above. But my knee is right in line with my ankle and my toe. And my leg is still lifted, right? It's still separated. It's like you start at the ending of your last exercise, your last movement. And just quickly to touch on this in the squat position, before we are in our squat standing, what often happens is we get into, if you have low back issues, we think, okay, I'm in this squat, I'm going to tuck under. I'm going to round my back to protect my back, right? I'm going to engage my core. But you can see that that kind of, it's totally shut down my muscles in my hip, right? And then as I go back to the other position, that's when I need them the most. They're not going to be ready. They're going to maybe be clenching and tucking under, and then I'm not going to be able to call on them to go back in the other direction. Often for many people who are very hypermobile, as we bend, then we go the other direction. We think, okay, I've got to keep my back neutral, and then they arch too much, and that's going to lead to that back pain issues, right? So too much grabbing in the lower back. Let's bring that knee forward and just twist open. And come back around. Up onto hands and knees. We'll do a couple rounds of our cat and cow stretch. I was talking the other day about bringing our feet into the stretch, so tucking those toes under, arching the spine, feeling that stretch length through the plantar fascia, bottom of the feet, and then tops of feet pressing, shins press down, belly lifts up, tailbone under. So steady neutral spine, come to your happy medium, your balanced position. My knees are separated. So if you're struggling to contract your core, you might start with your knees a little bit closer together. Kind of try to feel that lift as you squeeze in, or you could even squeeze something. Just for a couple deep breaths, practicing holding this neutral position. So again, this is going to play a role in how well we do in heading into our squatting. Can we hold our spine and just feel that movement in the hip? So it's not a tuck, right? It's not a pelvic tilt, tailbone under, round back to engage the core, but it's not the opposite. It's not arching. It's kind of trying to move while holding your back in position. Whoops, we got a little bit droopy there. So I think that the squeezing really helps me personally. We're just going to rock back and come back up. How much can you actually move in your hip without your back going either under or arching? Right? So those are the no-nos here, is just to try to maintain sit bones back and wide. Good. Because often we're tight from sitting, the front of the hip gets very tight. We're just going to follow that up with a hip flexor lengthening, Anjaneyasana, your low lunge, lift up, step the other foot forward, push down with your front foot, engage the hamstrings. Push down with your back knee, engage the glutes. There we are. Zip up your core. but also be level. You can raise your arm if that doesn't cause that destabilizing through the core and your back to take over. Good, come back down. So often when hip hinging, when that motion at the hip or squatting is very difficult, it might actually be that front of the hip that's stiff and tight. And the back part of the hip that's tight from gripping and grabbing too much. Second side. The front foot pushed down. It's actually engaging that arch lift. I'm engaging that doming a little bit. My knee is pointed over the second toe. I'm trying to engage my back glutes a little bit here. Raising the arm. To lift your torso up. Good. So our second try with hinging at the hip is one leg at a time. This looks like a normal tiger leg or bird dog extension, opposite arm and leg, but it's without cat and cow movement, so that we're not tempted to always move our back with the limbs. Right? It's just kind of teasing out those different movements so that we can feel them later. So I'm going to remember that block and try to engage inward and upward with my core. I'm going to reach the leg back, one leg you choose, and you could also reach your opposite arm. I'm just going to do the leg right now. I'm going to try bending the knee towards the floor and then reach back up. So remember being on your side as you bend your knee. You can even watch it here. Is your knee turning inward? Is it fanning open? Now that may be that outer hip, outer thigh tightness. But again, the movement at the hip, can you bend your knee, bending the knee towards your chest without your tailbone going under? So without that cat back, or without doing the opposite, like over exaggerating what we think of as neutral. Just hold steady. So if you are moving the opposite arm, maybe the hand just comes in and then reaches out. It's a lot harder to balance on your standing shoulder. So take a little child's pose in between. And then second side, reach it back and up. Bend. I'm just going to watch this knee. And then rest. Again. Child's pose. And we'll go ahead and come on up. You could sit to do this, of course. I'm going to do it standing, but wherever you feel safe and secure, you can use a hand on a wall. Hand is around my thighs. So here's where we started. We started with mountain pose, that Tadasana position, where you get your feet aligned. Worth noting, we always hear hips distance, sit bone distance, kind of interchangeably from our yoga teachers, right? I would argue that sit bone distance is more accurate, right? And for many of us, our translation of hip translates to where we think of our hips as being. So we put our feet here, and then the hip socket is right in here. So we're actually setting ourselves up for that knock knee kind of arches fallen position anyway. So it's too wide. So I want you to come in a little bit, but also turn your feet, make sure they're parallel. Just do that for a second, give in, kind of unlock your knees and let your knees kind of fall inward, let your arches roll inward. And then do the opposite. Think of that exhale, lift, engage, turn the knees forward, push against the band a little. Notice what you feel. Outer hip, belly kind of engaging and lifting as you exhale. So even just standing here, just practice getting a little bit of involvement in the hips when we're just standing. Hips and feet. You might notice it's one foot more than the other for you. It doesn't like to lift up. The arch is a little bit lower. It's a little bit lazier. Maybe when you try to do it, that foot, the toes really cramp up or they crunch up, right? In an attempt to make some movement happen. So make it smaller, take it easy, go back to doing it with your fingers assisting that arch so you can feel what it's like to lift up the arch. Okay, one hand on the ribs, take a nice deep breath, and this is that wide, deep breathing. And then as you exhale, again, all that stuff down below, arches, knees, ankles, feet, hips. Then from the pubic bone, lifting the muscles up. Ribs come all the way in. So your back is kind of letting go, right? You're supporting with your belly. So often when we stand in our mountain pose, we start to sink into that anterior pelvic tilt. So here's where tilting comes into the picture. When we're here, the hip flexors get tight, right? Hamstrings and glutes get short. Long, and they don't like to engage. And then our abs are all lengthened, and our back is short and tight. So lifting the core up as you push out on that band, and then pulling those ribs all the way in and down. This is your beginning of your chair pose. Take a breath. As you exhale, engage. Then start to bend the knees and bend at the hips to squat back. And come back up, pressing into the feet. Watch as you come back up that your knees want to turn in. Keep pushing out into the band. So it's an exhale to engage, and then start to unlock the hips, bending at the hips and knees. Great place to be able to look at your feet and come back up. So you could do inhale to go down as you squat. Exhale, rising up to engagement, right? Now notice at the bottom, here's that check-in. Are you arching to come down into your squat? Are you doing the other? Are you tucking under? If you feel your lower back, come back up to the top, reset with that core engagement. Pubic bone lift, ribs in and down. Then start to bend the knees, sit the hips back. So moving at the hip joint, not at your low back. And then stay here if you want to build that endurance. Keep engaging with the band. Try not to let those arches fall. If you want to challenge your ability to hold your back steady, start to move those arms back by your head. One more breath. Press down, rise up. Good. And then go ahead and take this loop band if you had it. You can do all of these, of course, without a band, without resistance. And we'll come right down. We're going to take us into baby cradle. One ankle over the top of the knee and just rock side to side. You need to unwind those outer hip muscles. Want them to get strong without getting tight. Teaching them to contract and relax. Back to the center into your internal rotation of that hip for your seated twist. Growing tall through the crown of the head. And then come back up. Other side, over the top. Windshield wiper. I am turning my hips, not just my knee. Back to center. Internally rotate at the hip so that knee comes in. Come back to center and go ahead and lie down. Just nice to follow that up with a nice passive hip opener. We're going to do Supta Baddha Konasana, so soles of the feet touching, blocks under the thighs, head resting on something. Remember the setting of the block. Choose the setting that feels like it supports and holds you and allows you to rest. Bring your focus back to your deep breaths. Allow yourself to take rest. You go to come out of this position. I always use my hands to kind of assist that closing in and up of the knees and rolling off. Press yourself back up. May we be happy, healthy, be more at peace, and live with more ease in our body, mind, and heart. Namaste. Thanks for being here today. Hopefully this is helpful. Some of those tips can help with both your yoga practice and your daily life. Thanks.